7-year-old Aisha burst through the doors of the Steel Haven bar, tears streaming down her dark cheeks, gasping for air. 20 leather-clad bikers froze. But what she said next made their blood run cold. "Please, he's hurting my mama, and he said he'll kill her if anyone helps." The biggest biker, a man they called Hawk, stood up slowly. What happened next would either save this little black girl's family or destroy everything. No one, not the police, not the neighbors, not even Aisha herself, was ready for what these dangerous men were about to do. Before we ride deeper into this story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Every week, people from every corner of the world gather here for one reason: to believe in goodness again. And I love seeing how far these stories of courage and kindness reach. Drop your city or state in the comments. Oak Ridge, Georgia. A town so small you could drive through it in 8 minutes and still catch every porch light flickering on by sunset. Folks here know each other by name, or at least by reputation. And for as long as anyone can remember, there's been one place people whispered about but rarely stepped into: the Steel Haven bar. They say it's where the bikers gather, the kind of men polite company avoids making eye contact with. Leather vests, tattooed arms, growling engines that rattle windows on Main Street. To most of Oak Ridge, the Steel Haven was trouble waiting to happen. But those who actually knew its regulars knew better. The bar was built in 1992 by 3 Gulf War veterans who needed a place to belong after coming home to a world that didn't quite understand them. Over the years, their club, the Sentinels Motorcycle Club, became a brotherhood of veterans, mechanics, and working men who'd seen too much to judge anyone by their cover. They fixed engines for free, ran charity rides for local hospitals, and delivered food to widows when the snow came heavy. But that side of them rarely made it into conversation. Small towns remember rumors longer than they remember kindness. There's a saying carved into the wood behind the Steel Haven's counter: "Honor isn't what you wear, it's what you do when no one's watching." That, more than anything, defined them. But the bikers were hiding something that would soon become crucial, something buried beneath the laughter and the scent of motor oil. Aisha was 7 years old, the kind of little black girl who saw magic in everything. Her world was crayons and chalk dust, hopscotch lines drawn crooked on cracked pavement. She loved drawing more than anything. Her notebooks were filled with stick figures of her family. Her mother, Keisha, with tired eyes, but a kind smile, herself with braids and a yellow dress, and a tall man she labeled Dad. Keisha Washington worked double shifts at the diner on Route 41, pouring coffee and smiles for strangers who never guessed she hadn't slept in 2 days. She was exhausted, yes, but devoted. Every dollar she made went to keeping the lights on, keeping Aisha fed, keeping things normal, and for a while it almost was. Then came Marcus. He wasn't Aisha's father, but for a while he tried to be. He had the kind of charm small towns fall for. Polite, clean-cut, always quick with a handshake. The kind of man who said "yes, ma'am" to waitresses and waved at the neighbors mowing their lawns. To most of Oak Ridge, Marcus was a good man, reliable, respectable. But behind closed doors, the air changed. It started small, a raised voice here, a slam door there, apologies whispered through gritted teeth, flowers on the table. The next day, Keisha told herself it was stress, a rough patch, bad luck. Aisha told herself it was normal because that's what children do. They adjust. Sometimes when the shouting began, Aisha would retreat to her room, clutching her crayons like talismans. She'd draw her family the way she wished it was. Her mom smiling, her home quiet. But as the weeks passed, one of those drawings began to change. Marcus's figure, once smiling beside them, was now scribbled over in dark red. Next door, Mrs. Jenkins noticed the lights flicker on and off late at night. She'd pause at her window, watching, uncertain. Once she even stepped onto her porch, then hesitated and turned back inside. But 3 weeks before Aisha's desperate run, something changed in Marcus. Something dark. If you believe every child deserves to feel safe in their own home, then you need to keep watching. Because behind one closed door in Oak Ridge, a storm was quietly gathering. For 6 long months, the sounds came and went like clockwork. A door slamming, muffled shouting, a cry that rose, then fell into silence. The neighborhood of Pinecrest Lane learned how to tune it out. Mrs. Jenkins heard it most nights from her kitchen sink. She'd stop scrubbing, tilt her head toward the sound, and whisper, "Not again." The Thompsons, 2 doors down, turned up their television. Mr. Lee across the street told himself it wasn't his business. Every one of them had a reason, a justification. He's a respected car salesman. Marriage problems are private. It's not my place. I didn't want to get involved. But behind those excuses, something far uglier was growing. A quiet agreement among decent people to look the other way. Once Mrs. Jenkins actually picked up the phone. Her hand trembled as she dialed 911. The police came, polite and efficient, standing in Marcus's doorway while he smiled calm and collected. "Just a misunderstanding," he'd said. Keisha stood behind him, eyes red but silent, nodding when the officer asked if everything was all right. They left 5 minutes later. The neighborhood exhaled in relief, and nothing changed. As the months passed, the bruises became harder to hide. Aisha stopped playing outside. Keisha stopped going to church. And yet, the world kept spinning. Lawns mowed, flags waving, dinners served, while a mother and daughter lived in quiet fear a few doors down. Miss Jenkins would later say, "I thought someone else would help, someone braver, someone closer. I didn't think it had to be me, but help never came." And here's the bitter truth about silence. It doesn't make the problem disappear. It feeds it. September 22nd, 3:47 p.m. That's when everything broke. Remember that biker bar everyone was so afraid of? The one folks crossed the street to avoid? They were about to become Aisha's only hope. Years later, Mrs. Jenkins would sit in front of a camera, her voice shaking. "I heard her screaming," she said, "for 6 months, and I did nothing." But the bikers, those men we judged, they were the only ones who ran toward the sound. If you can't stand people who see evil and do nothing, smash that like button. Your click means you're not one of them. The truth is, Oak Ridge wasn't a cruel town. It was a comfortable one. And comfort, when it becomes more important than conscience, can be deadly. Behind those neatly trimmed hedges and smiling front porches, everyone was waiting for someone else to do the right thing. But no one did, not until a terrified little black girl made the most desperate decision of her life and ran toward the one place her stepfather said would destroy her. And that choice would change everything. That afternoon began like any other. Quiet, gray, unremarkable. But for Aisha and her mother, it would end in chaos. Marcus came home early. The sound of his truck door slamming echoed down the street like a gunshot. He stumbled through the front door, eyes bloodshot, shirt half untucked, reeking of whiskey and failure. He'd been fired. His boss had finally uncovered the truth. A hidden gambling debt that had eaten through the company's trust and their savings. The man who prided himself on control had lost it all. And now he needed someone to blame. Keisha stood in the kitchen, frozen. She'd seen that look before. The wild, twitching anger that meant there was no reasoning left. She tried to stay calm, keep her voice low, tell him they could figure it out. But Marcus wasn't listening. His rage had found its target. In the corner, Aisha clutched her drawing pad, watching her mother's trembling hands reach for her keys. She knew what that meant. Mom was going to take her and leave. And that was the moment Marcus snapped. A shout, The crash of breaking glass, the dull, sickening thud of something striking, something soft. Then silence. For a second, just silence. And then Keisha's scream, raw, desperate, final. That's when Aisha heard the sound that would change everything, something breaking, not just the lamp, not just her mother's voice, but something inside both of them. Inside her mother, a fragile hope shattered inside Marcus. Whatever thin line of humanity he had left, gone. Aisha didn't think. She just moved, bare feet on the cold floor, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She grabbed her jacket, shoved open the screen door, and ran. But not to the neighbors, not to the police station, not even to her grandmother's house across town. She ran toward the one place her stepfather told her never to go, the Steel Haven bar he'd sneered once. That's where the criminals hide. You stay away from those bikers, Aisha. They're dangerous. Maybe that's why she ran there. Maybe even at 7, she knew that the only people who might understand danger were the ones who lived with it. Aisha made a choice that no child should ever have to make. She ran for her life, and what happened in the next 30 minutes would expose the truth about who the real monsters are in this town. The Steel Haven bar had never known silence like that. 1 second it was filled with the low hum of country music, the clinking of beer bottles, the sound of men laughing about old battles and bad knees. The next, the door burst open with a bang that made everyone turn. A little black girl stood there, small, trembling breath, hitching in short gasps. Mud on her shoes, blood on her sleeve, eyes wide with a kind of terror you can't fake. I need help, she screamed, and just like that, 20 bikers stopped everything. Chairs froze mid-scrape. A pool cue hung in the air. Even the jukebox seemed to choke on the next note. Every man in that room, men who had seen war, loss, and darkness, knew what real fear looked like, and they saw it written all over her tiny face. Hawk was the first to move. Jamal Hawk Reynolds, 52 years old, Army veteran, the kind of man people instinctively made room for when he walked by. He'd run the Steel Haven for almost 2 decades, not because he needed money, but because it kept the ghosts quiet. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He stopped just a few feet away, hands open, voice low and steady. "Hey now, sweetheart," he said. "You're safe here. Tell me what happened." It came out in fragments, words tripping over sobs. He hurt Mommy. I ran. I didn't know where to go. Hawk dropped to one knee until his eyes were level with hers. His voice softened even further, the tone of a man who'd spent too many years wishing he'd said these words sooner. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "we've got you now. Nobody's going to hurt you or your mama. I promise." A murmur rippled through the bar. The bikers, men with names like Brick, Wolf, Gear, shifted their weight, eyes hardening. Without being told, they began to form a circle around Aisha, not trapping her, but protecting her. A silent oath took shape in that moment, passed between them like a spark. "She's one of ours now." Hawk's gaze lingered on her small, trembling hands. Then something flickered in his eyes. Pain, recognition, guilt, because he'd seen this before. For just a heartbeat, the world fell away. Hawk stood in another place, another time, rain tapping on a casket. A photograph of a girl with the same dark skin and shy smile as Aisha. His daughter Tamika gone because he hadn't gotten there in time. His voice in the flashback was barely a whisper. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save this one." When he came back to the present, his jaw was set like stone. He turned to the others. "Brick, lock the doors. Wolf, get Doc on standby. Nobody in or out until I say so." No one questioned him, but as Hawk lifted Aisha into his arms, A shadow crossed his expression. Something only his closest brothers would recognize. Because while Aisha clung to his leather vest and sobbed into his shoulder, he was remembering a name. Marcus Washington, the stepfather. And Hawk knew something Aisha didn't. Something that made the air in the room grow heavy and cold. He'd heard that name before. Years ago on a report about a car salesman tied to an outlaw loan ring. One with connections far dirtier and more dangerous than a small-town drunk. This wasn't going to be simple, but Hawk knew something Aisha didn't. Something about her stepfather that would make this rescue far more dangerous than anyone expected. He looked down at her again, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of his callous hand. "You did the right thing coming here," he said quietly. "Your family now." And as the rest of the Sentinel's MC tightened their circle, the faint light caught the edge of Hawk's army ring, a symbol of promises made long ago, and one more he was about to keep. If you believe real strength is protecting those who can't protect themselves, don't forget to subscribe. Comment "Real men protect." They don't hurt. Let the world see who still stands for what's right. In that tiny bar on the edge of Oak Ridge, a battle line had just been drawn. Only this time, it wasn't between soldiers and enemies. It was between good men and the monster waiting back at that little house on Pinecrest Lane. The Steel Haven bar transformed in minutes. What had been a room full of laughter and jukebox tunes now felt like a command center. Orders were given. Movements became deliberate. Calm replaced panic. Hawk didn't call the police first. He reached for a different number, a number he trusted more. "Maria," he said when she picked up, his voice low and steady. "We've got a situation. Little girl came in. Looks like domestic violence. Mother's still in danger." There was no hesitation on the other end. "I'm on my way," Maria replied. Maria Gonzalez wasn't a biker, but she was family. A domestic violence counselor who'd worked with the Sentinel's MC for years, helping veterans and their families find a way out of broken homes. She was sharp, fearless, and by the book, exactly what they needed. By the time she arrived, the bar had become a tactical zone. Hawk stood at the center. A folded map of Oak Ridge spread across a pool table. Around him gathered the team. Brick, Viper, Maria, and 4 more members who'd seen their share of chaos, but always kept their heads cool. Brick, a former army medic, checked his bag. Gauze, splints, trauma kit, EpiPen, saline. "I'm good to go," he said. Viper sat behind a laptop, tapping quickly, fingers flying over keys. He was the quiet one, a tech specialist who documented everything because evidence meant accountability. Maria leaned over the map, taking notes. "We do this right by the book, or Marcus walks," she said firmly. "No hero moves, everything recorded. Once Keisha is safe, we bring in the cops with evidence they can't ignore." Hawk nodded. "We're not vigilantes. We're protectors. Everyone clear?" The group murmured back in agreement. Aisha sat nearby, bundled in a blanket on one of the leather sofas, a mug of cocoa trembling in her small hands. Beside her was Rosie, the bar owner's wife, a grandmother of 5 with a heart as big as her kitchen. She kept an arm around Aisha's shoulders, whispering gently, "You're safe now, baby. They're going to bring your mama back." Across the room, the plan came together with military precision. Viper synced up body cams to their phones. Brick checked comms. Maria read through the state domestic violence statutes, ready to cite them if the police arrived too soon, or Marcus tried to manipulate the story. Hawk's voice cut through the low murmur. "We go in controlled. No weapons drawn unless lives are in danger. We're there to rescue, not to fight. Cameras rolling at all times. Maria leads communication. Brick handles medical. Viper backup and record everything. Everyone else holds perimeter." They moved like soldiers preparing for deployment. Calm, methodical, focused. Each one had seen what rage could do to a home, to a woman, to a child, and none of them were willing to let history repeat itself. But then, Viper's laptop beeped. A small sound, but sharp enough to slice through the tension. He frowned, eyes narrowing as he read the screen. Pulling his background check now, he muttered. Seconds passed. His fingers stopped typing. His face went pale. "Boss," he said quietly, looking up at Hawk. "You need to see this." Hawk stepped forward. The others leaned in. "This guy isn't just abusive," Viper said, voice trembling now. He trailed off, staring at the monitor as if the words themselves were dangerous. Hawk's eyes flicked to the screen, and his jaw tightened. Something cold passed over the room. Maria looked from one man to another. "What is it?" she asked, but no one answered. Not yet. Across town, Marcus Washington was pacing his living room, knocking over furniture, his rage growing like a storm that couldn't find release. The house looked like a war zone. Shattered glass, overturned chairs, Keisha lying motionless on the floor. He muttered to himself, reaching for another drink, unaware that help was already on its way, and that his name was being whispered inside the Steel Haven bar like a curse. The bikers finished gearing up. Boots, gloves, jackets zipped, cameras on. Hawk looked at each of them. "No mistakes," he said. "We get her out safe. Whatever's waiting for us there, we handle it together." Outside, 3 vehicles roared to life, their headlights cut through the gathering dusk, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Rosie held Aisha close as the sound faded down the road. "They'll bring her back," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "They always do." But even Hawk, the man who had seen battlefields on 2 continents, couldn't shake the unease growing in his chest, because the look on Viper's face wasn't fear of a violent man. It was fear of something much bigger. 3 vehicles rolled out that night, and not one of them knew they were heading into something far worse than domestic violence. If you respect people who help without expecting applause, hit subscribe. Good people support good people. It's that simple. The engines quieted one by one as the 3 vehicles came to a stop along the curb of Pinecrest Lane. Their headlights cut through the dusk, bouncing off the pale siding of the Washington house. The same house where laughter used to echo on summer evenings, now standing dark and still like it was holding its breath. The bikers dismounted without a word. No shouting, no revving engines, just calm, deliberate movement. Boots on asphalt, cameras blinking red as they recorded. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there to save a life. Inside, lights flickered behind thin curtains. A shadow moved, erratic, pacing. Across the street, Mrs. Jenkins stood behind her own window, her hand trembling as she lifted her phone. For months, she'd done nothing. Tonight, she pressed record. Hawk took the lead, his presence alone enough to anchor the group. Maria followed close behind, her notepad tucked under her arm, her voice steady. "We announce ourselves," she reminded them quietly. "We offer help. We don't escalate. Everything on camera." Brick stood just behind, medical bag slung over his shoulder. Viper hung back slightly, phone in hand, monitoring the police dispatch channel. His jaw clenched tighter with every word on the screen. He hadn't told Hawk everything he'd just discovered, but the name on Marcus Washington's record wasn't matching the man who lived here. There was something else beneath that alias, something he was still confirming. Hawk motioned toward the door. Maria nodded, then stepped forward and knocked firmly. Once, twice, a pause, then footsteps. The door jerked open with a force that rattled the hinges. Marcus filled the doorway, unshaven, bloodshot, the smell of liquor spilling into the night air. His voice came sharp, venomous. "What the hell do you people want?" Maria's tone was calm, professional. "Mr. Washington, My name is Maria Gonzalez. I'm a crisis counselor with the Sentinel's MC. We received a report of possible domestic. Domestic what? Marcus snapped, cutting her off. You people think you can just show up at my house. Who called you? Hawk stepped forward slightly enough to draw Marcus's eyes to him. Your stepdaughter's safe, he said. We're here for Keisha. That's all. We're not here to fight. For a heartbeat, Marcus froze. The muscles in his jaw flexed. Then his voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Where's that little... The air around the porch seemed to thicken. Hawk didn't move. Didn't flinch. Behind him, Brick suddenly shifted his stance, hands loose at his sides, ready if things went wrong. Maria's voice remained even. Mr. Washington, I need you to step back from the door. We can resolve this safely. But Marcus didn't move back. He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. You're trespassing? He hissed. You think those bikes out there scare me? You don't know who you're dealing with. And he was right. They didn't. Not yet. Because at that exact moment, Viper's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the background report still loading. The file name blinked twice, then fully appeared. His eyes widened, color draining from his face. He looked up sharply, meeting Hawk's eyes across the yard. What Marcus didn't know, the story continued, was that Viper had just discovered his real identity. And when the police ran that name, everything would explode. But the bikers didn't know that yet. They just knew they were standing on a knife's edge. From her window across the street, Mrs. Jenkins zoomed her phone camera in, her breath fogging the glass. For the first time in 6 months, she wasn't pretending not to see. The porch light flickered. Hawk spoke softly. Keisha, if you can hear me, it's safe to come out. You're not alone anymore. Inside, something shifted. A faint sound, maybe movement. Marcus turned his head, distracted for a second too long. Viper glanced again at his screen. A single line of text stared back at him from the background report. Marcus Washington, alias linked to federal investigation. Suspected in 2 disappearances. Organized crime connections. 4 minutes until police arrival for minutes. That would feel like an eternity. Hawk saw Viper's expression change, but couldn't ask. Not now. Not with Marcus's eyes darting between them, his hand twitching near the doorframe, maybe reaching for something hidden. The street was silent. Only the low hum of idling engines and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. Even the night seemed to hold still. So, Jenkins whispered to herself, "Please, God, let them get her out." Inside the house, a light snapped off. Another flickered on. Hawk exhaled slowly. Every instinct told him this was about to turn bad, but they were there now. No turning back. And as Maria drew one steady breath to speak again, the countdown to chaos had already begun. The night air outside the Washington house felt stretched thin, as though even the wind was afraid to move. Marcus's hand gripped the edge of the half-open door, his knuckles whitening. His breathing came shallow and uneven, eyes darting between the bikers gathered across his porch. Hawk didn't speak. He simply held Marcus's gaze steady, unreadable, while Maria stood beside him, every word and movement measured. "Mr. Washington," she said carefully, "we're not here to argue. We just need to make sure Keisha is safe." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Inside the house, a sound broke through, a faint, muffled sob. Marcus's shoulders twitched, his tone sharpened. "She's fine. Go back to your little clubhouse before I call the cops." Hawk's answer was even quieter. "We already did." That landed like a hammer. Marcus's expression faltered for just a heartbeat before twisting into something uglier. "Then you better leave before they get here," he sneered. "I'll tell them you broke in. I'll tell them you threatened me." Behind Hawk, Viper's phone buzzed again. He angled the screen away, scanning the report, still updating, lines of data filling in faster than he could process. He didn't speak. Not yet. The name on that record didn't match the man standing in front of them, and the aliases stacking underneath it told a story far more dangerous than any of them had expected. A soft movement broke the standstill. The hallway light flickered, and Keisha appeared behind Marcus, barefoot, her face pale beneath the bruises. She clutched the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. One eye swollen nearly shut, her lips split. Her voice barely reached the porch. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Please just go." He didn't mean to. Brick saw it instantly. The guarded breath, the way she winced when air hit her ribs. He took a subtle step forward, voice low and clinical. "Broken rib," he muttered under his breath to Hawk. "Maybe more. She needs a hospital." Maria met Keisha's eyes. "You don't have to lie anymore," she said gently. "We're not here to make things worse. We just want to keep you safe." Keisha's eyes flickered toward Marcus. He didn't look at her. He glared at Maria instead. "Don't talk to her," he snapped. "You don't know what goes on in this house." Maria didn't flinch. "You're right," she replied. "That's why we're asking." The muscles in Marcus's jaw worked. For the first time, his facade cracked, the charm giving way to pure hostility. His voice dropped to a hiss. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Inside, a clock ticked faintly. Outside, the sound of idling engines from the curb filled the gap. The entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Hawk took a slow step forward, still calm. "Keisha," he said, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "You're not alone anymore. We've got medics, counselors, witnesses. The police are minutes away. You don't have to stay." Tears welled in Keisha's eyes. She shook her head once, twice, then whispered almost inaudible. "Please stop. He gets worse when people interfere." That sentence hit harder than a punch. Maria's throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "Keisha, this isn't interference. This is help. What's happening isn't your fault. You deserve safety." Viper's phone vibrated again. A notification blinked across the top of the screen. He opened it and froze. His face drained of color. The final background check had finished compiling. He scanned the text once, then again. A second profile linked under Marcus Washington's name. A new photo, a federal case number. He looked up sharply. "Boss," he said under his breath, "we've got a problem. Hawk didn't look back." "Say it." Viper hesitated, glancing at Keisha, then at Marcus, whose eyes had already narrowed, sensing the shift. "This guy's not Marcus Washington," Viper said quietly. "Name's Daniel Morrison. He's wanted interstate assault, fraud, 2 pending investigations for attempted homicide. Been hiding under an alias since 2005. A heavy pause followed. The truth hung between them, raw and electric. Maria's eyes widened. "He's a fugitive." Viper nodded once. "Confirmed. He's been flagged in a federal database. And there's one more note. Possible links to organized crime." Hawk's tone stayed even, but something behind it hardened. "Copy that." He turned back to Marcus. "So now we both know who you really are." The blood drained from Marcus's face, then flushed red again. "You've been digging into me?" he growled, taking a step forward. Brick shifted subtly, placing himself between Marcus and the others. "Don't," he said, quiet but absolute. Marcus's voice rose. "You think I'm scared of a bunch of bikers?" He swung his arm out, pointing at the cameras. "Turn those things off." Maria shook her head. "They stay on. Everything tonight is documented." Keisha flinched at his outburst. Her hand trembled on the doorframe, torn between fear and the flicker of something else. Resolve. For months she had covered bruises, explained away injuries, stayed silent. But now, seeing strangers risk themselves for her, something inside her shifted. She took one step forward, her voice cracking but clear. "Stop, Marcus!" He turned on her instantly. "Get back inside!" Hawk's command cut through the night like steel. "That's enough." Every biker moved as one, instinctively aligning around Keisha. Brick kept a steady hand near his med bag, ready if she collapsed. Maria's body was angled to shield her. Viperphone still recording sent the data packet directly to the incoming police unit. Marcus hesitated, sweat on his brow, breath uneven, eyes flicking toward the street as the first distant sirens began to echo through the neighborhood. "Game's over," Hawk said quietly, but the look in Marcus's eyes wasn't surrender. It was calculation. He took a single step back into the house, muttering something under his breath. Then his hand disappeared behind the doorframe. Viper's voice cut through the tension. "He's reaching." A sound snapped inside metal against wood. Hawk's voice came calm, controlled. "Everyone fall back." Brick guided Keisha down the steps, shielding her with his frame. Maria followed, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Viper moved last, camera still rolling. Then silence. From the porch, Hawk stood motionless, eyes fixed on the dark doorway. That's when Viper's phone buzzed one final time. A new alert appeared, one that made his stomach drop. The database had just updated. Daniel Morrison wasn't just wanted for violence. He was a suspect in 2 disappearances tied to a federal racketeering case. What Viper discovered, the story continues, would change this from a rescue to a manhunt. Because the man inside that house wasn't just a danger to his family. He was a wanted criminal hiding behind the mask of a suburban husband. And as those sirens drew closer, the Sentinels realized they hadn't just stepped into a domestic call. They'd walked straight into a war. If you believe no one deserves to live in fear, share this story so it can reach someone who might need the courage to speak up. The porch light trembled against the night as the sirens grew closer, their echoes folding into the silence of Pinecrest Lane. Hawk stood unmoving, eyes fixed on the doorway that had swallowed Marcus Morrison whole. The house looked still, but the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion. Then it came, the sound of a bolt sliding, metal scraping against wood, a sharp click that froze everyone in place. Marcus stepped into view again. The porch light caught the cold glint of the hunting rifle in his hands. His face was drawn tight, streaked with sweat and rage, eyes wild and glassy. Every inch of his body trembled between fear and defiance. Behind him, the shadows of the hallway stretched long and distorted. He raised the rifle halfway, not yet aiming, but enough for everyone outside to feel the danger shift into something immediate and final. Hawk didn't move. Neither did Brick or Maria. They simply tightened their formation around Keisha, instinct turning them into a wall of muscle and resolve. Brick's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close as she trembled. Viper stood at the edge, phone still recording, breath sharp and uneven. The first cruiser screeched to a stop at the end of the block. Red and blue lights washed over the scene, flashing across the bikers' jackets and the pale siding of the Washington house. 2 officers stepped out, weapons drawn, but voices steady. "Drop the weapon," one shouted. Marcus flinched, his grip tightening. "They set me up!" he yelled. "They broke into my house!" Hawk took one slow step forward. His hands were up, empty, open. "No threat, no aggression, just calm, Daniel," he said quietly, using the name from the report. "You don't want to do this." The sirens faded as the last patrol car arrived, blocking off the street. Neighbors' windows glowed faintly behind curtains. Every breath, Every movement seemed amplified by the weight of what might come next. Daniel Hawk continued, his voice low but cutting through the chaos. I know you're scared. You think this is the end, but there's a little girl who needs her mother tonight. Don't make her lose both parents. Marcus's jaw trembled. His finger hovered near the trigger. I can't go back, he rasped. You don't know what prison did to me. I can't do it again. Hawk took another step. Slow, deliberate. The police held their positions, eyes flicking between the two men. Then don't, Hawk said softly. You have a choice right now. Prove you're not that man anymore. End it here the right way. The rifle wavered. Marcus's shoulders began to shake, his breath coming faster. He blinked hard, eyes darting between Hawk and Keisha, who stood behind the bikers, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her face. For the first time in years, he saw the fear in her eyes, not as defiance, but as pain. Maria's voice came gently from behind Hawk. She doesn't hate you, Daniel. She's just scared. Let her see the man you used to be. For a moment, something human cracked through the madness in his expression. The tension in his arms loosened. The rifle lowered slightly. I didn't mean to, Marcus whispered. His voice broke on the words. I just wanted them to stop lying about me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Hawk stopped a few feet away. The air between them felt like glass. One wrong move and it would shatter. Then stop it, he said quietly. Right now you can still make it right. The second stretched, 1 heartbeat, 2. Then the rifle slipped from Marcus's hands and clattered against the porch floorboards. Instantly, the officers moved in, securing him to the ground with careful precision. Marcus didn't resist. He just stared at the pavement beneath him, chest heaving. The fight drained from his body. Hawk stood over him, saying nothing. His expression wasn't victory. It was sorrow. Behind him, Keisha clung to Maria, sobbing into her shoulder as Brick checked her pulse, already calling in the paramedics. Viper's camera kept recording, catching the swirling lights, the blur of motion, the sound of breath returning to those who had been holding it for too long. In that moment, Hawk looked down at Marcus, not with anger, but with a kind of tragic understanding. For the first time, he didn't see a monster. He saw a man who'd been broken by his own demons, who had become everything he once swore he'd never be. The sirens faded into background hum as officers led Marcus away. The rifle lay abandoned on the porch, glinting beneath the red and blue haze. Hawk turned to Keisha, meeting her tearful gaze. You're safe now, he said, though his own voice carried the weight of everything they'd seen. And as the engines idled and the street began to breathe again, one truth settled heavy in the air. What had happened on that porch wasn't about power or punishment. It was about choice. Because sometimes courage doesn't look like fighting back. Sometimes it looks like refusing to let violence win. Morning broke over Oak Ridge like a sigh after a nightmare. The chaos, the flashing lights, the shouts, all of it had faded into quiet hospital corridors and the steady hum of fluorescent bulbs. Keisha lay in a narrow bed, pale but breathing, her body marked with the price of survival. 3 broken ribs, a mild concussion, and bruises that would take weeks to fade. Yet for the first time in years, there was peace in her face, the kind that comes not from safety alone, but from knowing it's finally over. At the foot of the bed, a small figure stirred. Aisha, her arm wrapped in a soft yellow cast, sat curled in a chair much too big for her. She hadn't let go of her mother's hand once since the ambulance arrived. Nurses had offered her blankets, toys, even snacks. But she'd just shaken her head, eyes locked on Keisha, unwilling to blink in case her mother vanished again. When Keisha woke fully, her first word wasn't a plea or an apology. It was a name, Aisha. The girl climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed. tears spilling before she could speak. "You're okay," she whispered, and Keisha managed a faint, broken smile. "Because of you," she breathed. Down the hall, the sentinels waited quietly. No leather, no noise, just a handful of men who suddenly looked older, heavier with the weight of everything that had nearly gone wrong. Hawk stood a few steps apart, his arms crossed loosely, his mind still looping through those 7 seconds on the porch. Viper leaned against the wall, phone tucked away, Brick flipping absently through a clipboard of medical forms he barely read. A nurse stepped out of Keisha's room and smiled gently. "They're ready for a visitor." Hawk nodded once and entered alone. Keisha looked up, eyes wet but steady. Aisha's grip on her hand tightened as Hawk approached the bedside. He stopped a respectful distance away, voice low and even. "You did good, both of you," he said. "You got each other through." Aisha blinked up at him. "You came back," she said softly. "You and your friends. You didn't let him hurt her." Hawk's expression softened. "That's what family does, sweetheart. And you? You did the brave thing. You saved your mama?" She thought for a moment, then whispered with the certainty only a child could have. "The bikers saved us. You're heroes." Outside the room, a detective was finishing paperwork beside a uniformed officer. "Charges confirmed," the officer said quietly. "He won't be getting out this time." Another man nearby, the hospital's security chief, murmured, "Never thought I'd see the day those bikers did what the law couldn't." But word spreads fast in small towns, and not everyone saw what had happened the same way. The police chief was already fielding calls from reporters. City council members whispered about image concerns. Parents worried about gangs near their neighborhoods. Some said the bikers had acted recklessly. Others said they'd saved lives. And in that quiet hospital hallway, Hawk could already feel the shift, the turning tide of opinion. The town was about to pick sides, because the story that should have ended here was just beginning. Some people couldn't accept that the so-called dangerous men in leather vests were the reason a mother and child were still alive. And what came next would reveal something dark beneath Oak Ridge's polite surface. A truth about how people see heroism and who they believe deserves redemption. The Sentinels had thought the battle ended when Marcus Morrison was taken away in handcuffs. But outside those hospital walls, another fight was waiting. One that wouldn't be fought with fists or weapons, but with judgment, fear, and the quiet cruelty of small-town gossip. For now, though, as Hawk stepped back into the corridor, he allowed himself one brief exhale, a moment of peace before the next storm. By morning, Oak Ridge was on every local channel. Camera crews stood outside the police station, the Washington House, the hospital, anywhere they could catch a quote or a shot of the leather-clad men who'd stepped into a nightmare and stopped it cold. But the coverage wasn't simple. Gratitude. It was a tug-of-war between admiration and suspicion. One anchor called them unlikely heroes. Another warned viewers about the dangers of taking justice into one's own hands. The footage looped again and again. Hawk stepping forward, hands up, talking down a man with a gun. Then came the mayor's statement. Standing stiff behind a podium, he said, "We appreciate their assistance in preventing further harm. However, we cannot condone acts of vigilantism within our community." The words landed flat, stripped of warmth. In town squares and church basements, the debate grew louder. Some pastors preached about courage, about how God sometimes sends help in unexpected forms. Others condemned what they called lawless interference, shaking their heads at those tattooed thugs. Coffee shops filled with whispers, people deciding which version of the story they preferred. For the neighbors on Pinecrest Lane, it hit harder. Curtains that had stayed closed for months now had shame. Everyone remembered the nights they'd heard shouting. The days they'd ignored bruises and excuses. The same people who'd looked away were now furious. Not at Marcus, but at the bikers for exposing what they hadn't done. Then came the confession that broke the silence. Jenkins, the widow 2 doors down, sat on her porch and recorded a trembling video on her phone. "I heard her screaming for 6 months," she said. "I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself someone else would help. But the bikers everyone feared, they acted in 60 seconds. They did what we wouldn't." The clip went viral overnight. Millions watched, shared, and argued. Some wrote messages of gratitude. Others hid behind moral outrage. The hashtag #OakRidge Bikers flooded every feed. Photos of the Sentinels riding through the town square. Memes, opinion threads, endless arguments about justice and image. Reporters swarmed the Sentinels' garage, shoving microphones toward anyone in leather. Viper refused to answer. Brick kept silent. Hawk simply said, "We didn't come here for thanks. We came because someone needed help." But his words only fueled the storm. Proof to some that the bikers didn't understand proper procedure, and to others that they embodied the kind of courage the world had forgotten. Behind the noise, Keisha and Aisha stayed in the hospital, shielded from the media frenzy. Keisha watched the coverage from her bed, bewildered that her private hell had become a public spectacle. Maria sat beside her, scrolling through comments, some hateful, some heartbreakingly kind. "People always need someone to blame," she said quietly, "and someone to believe in." Out in town, the tension thickened. Yard signs appeared. Justice, not vigilantes. Then counter signs. Sentinels of Oakridge. The same neighbors who had avoided eye contact now waved or turned away, depending on which story they chose to believe. But while Oakridge argued over who the heroes really were, something else was moving beneath the surface. Old case files reopened. New names appeared in police databases, and in a federal office 2 states away, an investigator recognized Marcus Morrison's alias from another unsolved assault. Because while the town shouted, something was happening behind the scenes, something involving Marcus's previous victims, and when the full truth finally surfaced, even the bikers themselves would be stunned by what they had actually stopped. The storm around Oakridge hadn't even begun to settle when federal agents arrived. Quiet, efficient, unmarked cars parked outside the police department. Files were exchanged behind closed doors, and suddenly, the tone of every conversation changed. This wasn't just about a violent husband anymore. It was about something far bigger and far darker. The background check Viper had pulled had only scratched the surface. When the FBI opened their own database, Marcus Morrison's name triggered cross-state alerts. Alias after alias appeared, each linked to a different woman. 7 in total, 4 states. 2 dead, 5 hospitalized. Each case dismissed as domestic dispute. Each manhunt quietly dropped when the suspect couldn't be located until now. His real name, they confirmed, was Daniel Kovac, a man who'd perfected his disguise through charm and control. He didn't just hurt, he hunted. His victims followed the same pattern. Single mothers, often new to town, no strong family nearby. He'd isolate them, cut off their support systems, make them dependent, then break them down until leaving felt impossible. Keisha wasn't his first victim. She was number 8, but she was the only one who lived to see him caught red-handed. The agents pieced together timelines, photos, witness statements. Every fragment painted the same picture. A predator who had slipped through the cracks again and again. The first woman had lived long enough to report him. The second hadn't. The third disappeared entirely. No one connected the dots because the names kept changing and the records never crossed jurisdictions. And then came Aisha, A child who in 7 seconds of instinct and courage shattered that cycle. She had run into a bar full of bikers because no one else would listen. That single act had pulled an invisible monster into the light. An FBI agent standing before a cluster of reporters didn't mince words. "Those bikers," he said, "did what the system failed to do 7 times. Their intervention saved a life, and maybe more than one. It wasn't flattery, it was fact. The data proved it. Had the Sentinels not stepped in that night, Daniel Kovac would have fled again to another town, another name, another woman. Keisha would have become another statistic. Aisha, another orphan." When the bikers heard the full report, the room went still. Even Hawk, a man who'd seen more darkness than he ever spoke of, lowered his head. For months, they thought they were just responding to one act of cruelty. Now they realized they'd cut short a killing pattern years in the making. Maria's eyes welled with tears as she looked at Keisha's photo on the briefing board. "She survived," she whispered. "She actually survived." Brick exhaled slowly because her little girl didn't freeze. It was more than justice. It was vindication for every bruise ignored, every call unanswered, every victim who had been told to work it out. The Sentinels hadn't just defended a family. They had forced the world to see what the system had refused to acknowledge. And as the report spread, something in the national conversation shifted. The headlines weren't just about bikers or violence anymore. They were about failure and courage, about how heroes can look like men covered in tattoos and road dust, not badges and suits. Because Aisha's 7-second decision to run into that bar didn't just save her mother. It saved every future victim Daniel Kovac would have found. And remember that question from the beginning. Who are the real monsters? Now the answer was clear. The monster wasn't the man on the motorcycle. It was the one who wore a neighbor's smile, hid behind closed doors, and counted on silence to keep him safe. 6 months later, the bruises had faded, but the story they left behind had grown into something no one in Oak Ridge could have imagined. Keisha walked a little slower than she used to, her ribs still tender, but her eyes, once hollow, now carried purpose. The woman who had once whispered apologies in the dark had become the voice for others who couldn't yet speak. In a small office above the old bakery, she started the Aisha Foundation, a support network for victims of domestic abuse. It began with 3 women in a borrowed coffee pot. By the end of the year, there were hundreds of survivors, counselors, volunteers meeting every week. Keisha told her story openly, not with shame, but strength, reminding everyone that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about fighting back against silence. Aisha, now back in school, was thriving. Therapy helped her sleep again, and her drawings filled her teachers with hope. Pictures of motorcycles, sunshine, and her mother smiling. Once a child who ran for help in terror, she'd become a symbol of bravery across the state. The Steel Haven bar, once just a biker hangout, had transformed too. What used to echo with the rumble of engines now hosted open-door nights for domestic violence survivors. No judgment, no fear, just safety. On its walls hung photos of the Sentinels beside women who'd rebuilt their lives. Proof that compassion could wear leather and steel. Each spring, the bikers rode together in an event they called Hawk Run, a 300-mile ride raising funds for domestic violence shelters. Hundreds joined, their engines thundering like a promise that no one would ever face what Keisha had faced alone again. Even Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who once watched in silence, found her courage. She trained as a court advocate, sitting beside survivors through hearings and trials, ensuring no one would ever feel as unseen as she had allowed Keisha to be. And the rest of the neighborhood, they changed too. The same people who once shut their blinds started a real neighborhood watch. But this time, they watched for the right reasons. They checked in on one another, They listened. Oak Ridge wasn't perfect, but it was awake, because what began with fear had grown into something unstoppable: community. But the most important change, it didn't happen at the bar, or even in Oak Ridge. It happened in living rooms across America. Because when people heard Aisha's story, they didn't just see tragedy. They saw warning signs in their own lives, and courage where there had once been silence. And that courage would save lives far beyond Oak Ridge. If this story moved you, share it. Not for the bikers, not even for Aisha. Share it for the person in your life who might be living that same nightmare right now. Your share could save a life. If you believe one person can make a difference, hit subscribe. If you believe looking away is just as bad as causing harm, hit that like button. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it right now. Comment saying, "I won't look away." Tell me you're one of the good ones.